Kagiso seasonally adjusted PMI for the month of April has hit its lowest level since July 2011. Andre Coetzee, Managing Director of CIPS or CIPS Africa, joins us now for more. Andre, thanks so much for your time today. It's an interesting discussion that we no doubt are going to have given the significant decline in the PMI in just under 3 years. This blip, is it expected, especially given the economic climate that South Africa sits in at the moment?
Yes, no, definitely. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, I don't think it's unexpected. You know, if you just look at the PMI over the past few months, we've actually been sort of, you know, around this 50 level, you know, and then we're up and above 50, and then below 50. Basically indicating that the manufacturing sector is actually going nowhere in a hurry, and which is concerning, you know, especially if you take into account that that's the second largest sector in the South African economy.
I want us to zone in on that a little bit further, because so often we hear about the strife and the turmoil within the manufacturing sector, but it does seem as though there are no solutions being provided to that industry.
Well, I think, you know, if you look at, we've been going through protracted strikes over, you know, if you can think back, you know, we've been sort of plagued by these strikes, you know, every now and then, and especially what's happening now. And if you think about the link between the manufacturing sector and mining, obviously, you know, it will have a major impact on the manufacturing sector. And then secondly, I think, you know, structurally, if you look at our manufacturing sector, if you look at beneficiation and all of that, there's not a lot of that happening. We're very good, and not only in South Africa, I think in the rest of Africa, to extract, you know, our mineral resources, export it out of South Africa and buy it back, you know, as finished goods. So I think structurally we need to look at the manufacturing sector if we want to really see a good recovery in this sector.
Are there proposed solutions though out there, maybe government as well as industry coming together to sit down at the table?
Yes, you know, there's a lot of good plans. You know, if you look at the plans that are on the table, they're there, but the problem that we see is actually implementation. You know, there seems to be a problem. So hopefully, you know, after the elections, when everybody's now done and finished with all the electioneering and all the politicking, you know, in South Africa, maybe we can then sit down and take these things serious, because we need to take this serious, because the manufacturing sector is the one sector that can provide a lot of the much needed job opportunities in South Africa. And again, if you look at the sub-index of employment, it's significantly down, which is really concerning.
It's interesting because another area that's highlighted is South Africa's manufacturing sector versus that of developed nations, where they are thriving or picking up quite significantly, but EMs like South Africa are lagging.
Yes, no, you know, and it's not a good sign. But fortunately, you know, the Eurozone seems to be on the recovery, and also the US, you know, major trading partners of South Africa. So at least that's good news. So maybe we'll just see a bit of an underpinning of our manufacturing sector because of those developments. But then again, China is also below 50. But yeah, so we are lagging, and that's really concerning.
Structural problems, as you mentioned once again. Another interesting movement that we've seen is the business activity. That's also down quite substantially, sits at 43.5. What's the core issue there?
Well, you know, I think if you look at production, and again, I tend to sort of draw it back to the link between mining and manufacturing. If you look at the sort of production stoppages in the platinum mining sector, it will have an influence on demand. It will have an influence on output. So I think a lot of it actually rides on what's happening in the mining sector at the moment.
But this ongoing strike as well in the platinum industry, which is due to enter its 15th week, I think this week, will we see results of the ripple effects of this ongoing strike again in the next PMI data? Well,
we're seeing it at the moment, and unfortunately, I just saw while I was waiting for the interview, some of the breaking news is that, you know, there are threats of more widespread strikes if they can't resolve the current issue. You know, so unfortunately, you know, things aren't looking great for the sector at the moment.
I know you're not an economist, but when you take a look at the bigger picture of things for the South African economy, you've got sluggish growth, high unemployment, as you mentioned, and this declining business environment. What's the worst case scenario here?
Well, I must say there's definitely risk to the downside, because if you just look at the PMI, the forecast for this month was actually unchanged at 50.3, and it came down quite a few points below that. And then again, if you link that back to actual manufacturing production, it is forecast at about 1.4% year on year. The PMI being sort of the earliest indication of what's happening in the manufacturing sector. So we could actually see the year on year number actually lower than expected. And again, the ripple effect through to the total GDP does not bode well for the economic growth, going forward.
So for a businessman who's probably watching the show today, where does this leave them? How do they position themselves in order to handle the blow?
Well, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I think the one thing that the guys grapple with is, in terms of employment. Should we employ more? Should we lay off more people? Those are the kind of things, and it's very difficult to gauge. But I would be tending and erring to the side of caution if I was a businessman, if I was in the manufacturing sector, because it's a very I wouldn't say unstable, but there's no clear indication of this sector actually booming and growing in the next month or two.
And the ongoing threat perhaps of an increase in interest rates?
Well, that obviously will sort of, dampen local demand, which again will have an impact on the overall economy. So I'm you can probably gauge that I'm more on the bearish side than on the bullish side.
Give us some light here at the end of the tunnel, Mr. Coetzee. Something as bright as your shirt, perhaps. Is there anything positive that we can look forward to?
There is something that's positive, but again, I would like to counter it with something slightly negative, because the only forward-looking sub-index in the PMI is expected business conditions in 6 months' time. That is still below the 50 mark, indicative of people basically expecting conditions to improve. But then within the PMI, you've got a leading indicator, which is a ratio between new sales orders and inventories, and that's sitting below 1, indicative of that inventories are high compared to the demand for manufactured products. And I think that outweighs the positive news. So unfortunately, I have to sort of end with slight negative news that, we'll have to watch that leading indicator before we can actually turn positive on this sector.
And this will no doubt also have ripple effects onto the consumer environment.
Well, I think, definitely it will, but I think, the other side of the coin is that the consumer environment would probably have a bigger impact, on this sector. Demand for manufactured goods is probably going to slow, if anything.
Sheesh.